Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me. I'm Gregory and welcome to D&D Daily number 20. This kind of feels like a milestone. Hey, I'm Gregory. This is 1 in 20 D&D where I love talking about everything D&D and RPG and sharing my thoughts and random silliness with you. So it's Friday, and last night I did watch, as I said I would, a bit of the Critical Role and started it out the beginning of the session live. I got a little tired because it was getting late, and I had a very hard day at work yesterday, so I didn't watch the whole episode. I didn't even watch the whole first half. But I did check out like the first hour or something of the show, and so it was fun. It was neat. I didn't really pay much attention to the chat. I actually prefer to just like focus on the game and what's actually happening and the interplay. I love all the character interplay between all the players and their individual characters. And of course between them and Matt, the DM. So love that. Had fun watching that. I picked up where I left off this morning, and I will, as usual, finish watching it over the weekend. Now, yesterday in D&D Daily number 19, I talked about a different approach, or sort of like my new school approach. I talked a little old school versus new school, and my new school approach to leveling up your characters. And one of the things I mentioned during the stream yesterday, during the video yesterday, is character roles. And I said, because I didn't want to I didn't want to divert myself into talking about character roles in that moment yesterday. I wanted to stay focused on old school versus new school as far as character development. However, I did want to talk about it because I think it's a really fascinating way to approach developing, building, creating characters. So, here's some thoughts, my thoughts on character roles, what they mean, and how they apply to, say, different classes. I'm not going to get super in depth. I'm just going to share some basic thoughts and share some basic ideas. So, what are the primary roles? Now, if you're playing an RPG online like WoW or something like this, especially if it's an MMORPG or whatever, MMORPG, there tends to be basic, simple roles. Those roles normally boil down to 3, 4, maybe 5, you could say. So the primary roles, there's 2 primary roles, let's say. Tank and healer. And actually we should say there's 3. Let's do it that way. There's really 3 primary roles. Tank, healer, DPS, or damage dealer. DPS, damage per second. That's like a very video game term. So damage dealer maybe is a better way to say it. Who's going to be the person taking the character, the opponents, the NPCs and the monsters? Who's going to be the character that takes them down? So those are the 3 primary: tank, healer, and damage dealer. 4th and 5th, you could say 4th might be like crowd control, which is like if you have a mob of attackers, like you're facing a small horde of goblins. You're 4 or 5 people or 6 people against like 20 goblins. How do you deal with that? So the crowd control sometimes that's an important role sometimes, and there's also in the game terms you have like the off tank and that sort of thing. So there are other roles that we could talk about, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to stay focused on the 3 primaries and touch a little bit on the extras. So let's first talk about a tank. What's the tank? The tank is the meat shield. The tank is the person who's going to suck up tons of damage and or prevent damage being done to the party. So you're either a tin can with a sword, meaning you have a whole boatload of armor, like super high armor class, you know, 20 armor class or something ridiculous. 22. I have seen a 23 armor class, which is just absolutely bonkers in 5e Dungeons and Dragons. And that's not going to happen at first level. So let me dial it back and talk. Let's talk just first level. So first level, you're going to be maybe a fighter, could be a paladin, it could be a cleric, it could be a druid, and it could be a barbarian. Monks don't really work as tanks. They kind of can, but they really ultimately don't. I think if you're playing a monk, you really need to think of your monk as a damage dealer. Maybe crowd control, but not even really that. I think the best way to think and play a monk is to think of them as damage dealers. But let's get back to tanks. Tanks, you either need to have an ability to absorb a ton of damage, like a barbarian and like a druid. Why a druid? Because a druid can shapeshift. So a druid can become a bear or a dog or a wolf or something else. A hyena. Hyenas are great because they have lots of hit points. So you can become something else that has lots of hit points. And then when that something else loses all its hit points, you go back to being yourself with your standard hit points. Now, that means at first level as a druid, let's say at first level as a druid you have 10 hit points. Okay, that's a fairly decent amount for a druid at first level. You have 10 hit points. Well, if you augment that with the 30 or 35 or 27 or whatever it is for your other form, I mean, that like doubles or triples your hit points easily. Triples or quadruples your hit points. That's a lot of damage you can suck up for the party, right? As long as you can get in people's faces and get them to attack you. So that's part of how you play the role. Barbarians are great too. When you're raging, you take half damage from most attacks. So that works. If you are a fighter, a paladin, or whatnot, a cleric, you can wear tons of crazy armor. So at first level, you might have a 16 armor class. 17 maybe, 18 possibly, but that's like, wow. You know, again, you'd have to have exactly the right stats, exactly the right feats, etc. It's possible, but it's tricky, and wow. So that's tank. So do you have a tank? But so there's different ways to approach being a tank. Are you going to be the druid who shapeshifts, or are you going to be the fighter that has a shield and lots of armor? Those are big, important questions to deal with, and that's how you approach character creation. Healers, same thing. You could be a druid, you could be a cleric, you could be a bard. Bards make good healers. Bards almost can be a good tank. And they certainly can be a good damage dealer. The bard is the jack of all trades, remember that. You fill in the gaps. That's what I think bards, personally the way I play bards fill in the gaps. That's what they're best at. Cleric, druid, and paladin can be a healer, of course. I mean, bards can be healers. Now, the most effective is obviously going to be cleric, but that doesn't mean you have to be a cleric. Think about, if you want to be a healer, think about other elements of being a healer. Excuse me, especially in 5e. Helping your party deal with death saves is a critical element of being a healer. Having a medicine kit, having medicine, having spare the dying as a cleric, these kind of spells. So that's important. So think about that and let that speak to how you create your character. You know, maybe you're a loving mother who decided those silly adventurers out there need somebody's help, and I'm going to do it. Maybe you're not a mother, but a mother figure. You know, maybe you were a combat medic as a soldier. You learned how to bind wounds and splint, broken bones and all that. And you decided to become an adventurer. These are things that can feed that. And your role can feed your character background, your character development. And ultimately, of course, the damage dealers tend to be Lots of fun and easy to deal with. Obviously, rogues, fighters, barbarians. See, there's overlap. A paladin can actually make a pretty good damage dealer if you manipulate your abilities and especially your spells and your weapons correctly. Okay? Druids can make powerful damage dealers. Wizards, sorcerers, monks, all of these characters, pretty much any character class. The one thing that any character class can do is do a lot of damage. If you set it up correctly. So if you want to be a damage dealer, it's kind of like the sky's the limit. Everything from warlock to barbarian can be a decent damage dealer. Obviously, rogues and maybe wizards or sorcerers have like the little bit of a boost of like, wow, they can do a whole lot of damage all at once. But every class can do it. So I just want to, I don't want to keep talking too much about this. I'm probably going to spend other times focusing in a little bit more on each. But my thought was today to share this concept of take the role that you want to play and let that feed who your character is. The character background, the character makeup, their structure for your stats. Like, let it feed every level of your character. You know, how you develop the character through the game. If they're a tank, what are they doing to become a better tank? If they're a damage dealer, what are they doing to become a better damage dealer? You start out with a rogue. I'm going to give one example and then I'll end the video. Here's what I'm talking about. You start out as a rogue and all you've got is, let's say, a scimitar and a dagger. And that works great. And you realize that, well, attacking one-handed, you don't do a whole lot of damage one-handed unless you get your sneak attack. So you say, okay, well, maybe I should try to use both hands and attack with both, my scimitar and my dagger. Now you're doing more damage generally per round. Well, maybe you realize that, you know what, the scimitar, it's great, but I should be doing more damage. Maybe I need to go up to a rapier. Now you're limited because you're probably going to be using finesse weapons, and that's, what are you going to do? So maybe you start thinking about how can you augment your dexterity, make sure you max your dexterity. How can you make sure you're sneak attacking all the time? So that starts coming into your strategy. How do you actually play your character in the game? So those are all different kinds of things you can think about as you're playing in the game, as you're developing this character, and let that stuff come through your role playing. It will make you a better player at the table, and it will certainly make the game more fun for everybody. It'll make it more fun for you because you're thinking about how, growing and changing, and your character is evolving rather than being a stagnant, stale, boring character. That's my thoughts for today. I went a little longer than typical, but this is something I have lots and lots to say about. I have lots that I think about. This is how I approach my characters and my character development in the games that I play. So I'll probably share a lot more about this in the coming days and weeks. In the meantime, thanks for stopping in. Send me a like, send me a comment. Can't wait to see you at a table someday. And keep rolling 20s, my friends.